Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and I am the host of this podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I am also a newly minted USA Today best-selling author of the novel Blank. I've created a whole community of book lovers around this podcast, a publishing company, reading retreats, a bookstore, and more. Learn more at zibbymedia.com or follow me on social at Zibby Owens or join the community at Zibby Readers. Nell Freudenberger is the author of The Limits, a novel. Nell is the author of the novels Lost and Wanted, The Newlyweds and the Dissident, and of the short story collection Lucky Girls, which I loved, by the way, which won the Penn Malamud Award and the Sue Kaufman Prize for First Fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Named one of the New Yorker's 20 Under 40 in 2010, she is a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Whiting Award, and a Coleman Fellowship from the New York Public Library. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband, daughter, and son, and this is the second time she has been on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, so welcome back to Nell. Welcome back to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Nell, excited to talk about The Limits. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, The Limits. Talk to me. Tell the audience what your book is about and where the idea came from. And by the way,
Sure.
This is one of the coolest covers ever, by the way.
I agree.
love it. Do you love it?
The first try, I loved it. Yeah,
I love
absolutely. I was thrilled. Yeah, so I started writing The Limits because I had become sort of obsessed with the deep ocean. The book is about a scientist named Natalie. She's French, and she works on the island of Moorea in French Polynesia, which has been an epicenter for coral research for decades. And she loves the deep ocean because it's almost totally unexplored. It's like an alien world. It's full of creatures that scientists have never seen before, but she's pulled by all of her ties on land. She has a teenage daughter named Pia, who is going to New York to live with her father and her new stepmother, sort of against her will. And her stepmother, Kate, is a New York City school teacher, and neither she nor Pia is prepared for the amount of time that they're going to spend together because of quarantine. Kate also has a student named Athena, who is like a lot of the students who I worked with during the pandemic, is a girl dealing with her schoolwork, but also with caring for her nephew. I found that a lot of teenage girls during the pandemic suddenly had childcare responsibilities in addition to everything else that goes along with being a high school senior. So the book, I think when I start, I don't know what it's like for you, but when I start writing, I usually don't exactly know what the book is about. And I had this amazing teacher in my MFA program, Brian Morton, who said that the themes in a book are just the writer's obsessions. And I've always remembered that. So I think this book for me is about the way that the natural world is changing and how it puts pressure on our most important relationships.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right about the obsessions. I feel like writers.
Well, Brian's right. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, Brian's right. Sorry. Well, you're right to quote Brian. We can, it's coming from you today. I remember Dani Shapiro saying like she realized that she's been writing about her father ever since. And then by the time she wrote Inheritance, where she realized her father was not her father, she's like, oh my gosh, I've been writing about this search for father the whole time. It's like that, right? You don't even know, but it's in there and it comes out.
Right. Right.
So you have this set during the pandemic and you have points of view from the doctor. What's his name? Ken? His name's not Ken. Steven. Sorry. I knew there was an E.
You can call him Ken if you want.
No, it's okay. Steven. I'm very sorry. So Steven is carrying the weight of being a doctor throughout this crisis and having to come home and, as we read in the news, all the doctors coming home and taking off all the paraphernalia and then having to sort of re-engage. And there's this one element of the storyline where he has I don't want to give anything away, maybe, but can I talk about that?
I think it's okay to say his wife is pregnant.
Okay, fine.
Pretty early in the book.
Right, okay. So he has a patient who passes away from COVID who's pregnant, which is devastating. And then as he's fighting to save that patient, he finds out his wife is pregnant. And how can he, or maybe the patient had already passed away. But anyway, how can he celebrate in his own life when he feels so helpless in his professional life, and sort of that juxtaposition and how much pain he feels just being in that moment. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think that Steven is someone who is a smart guy who's worked really hard and also has a lot of resources, and he just hasn't come up against a lot of situations where he is not in control before. And so COVID kind of stops him for that reason. I have a really dear friend who works at SUNY Downstate, which is a hospital that has actually a lot fewer resources than the one where the character works. And she said, and she, we were always telling her what a hero she was. And she said that is the opposite of the way that I feel. She said, I came home from work, told me one day she came home from work and she said to her husband, today I found a charger for a man on a ventilator, so that like his family could have a FaceTime with him. And she's like, and that's the most useful thing I did today. And this is someone who was trained as an infectious disease specialist before, unlike Stephen, who's a cardiologist who's shunted into this work and has to kind of learn it on the fly. She actually was the person who was most sought after during that time. And she felt that helpless. She felt that, what she could do was find a charger. So it was just amazing to talk to her through that time. And I think she was very helpful reading through those chapters for me.
Did you always know? Well, I guess you didn't since you didn't have an outline. But as Stephen's storyline and all of the COVID stuff, if you will, came out, were you surprised by that? Were you like, oh, of course, because obviously this is on my mind right now? Or did you think about sort of hiding it? I know that authors have been divided. Like, do you just pick a time where it's unclear when the time is, so you're not betraying reality by not having COVID?
Yeah, and you see it with TV shows too. It's like, are they going to wear masks on Succession or not?
Right, exactly.
I guess I don't think of it so much as a COVID book because I've always been a novelist I've always written about the time that, a little earlier than when I'm writing. I'm a contemporary novelist. I've never tried historical fiction. When I've tried speculative fiction about the future, it's been kind of a total disaster. I'd love to be able to do those things successfully, but it's not the kind of idea that I usually have. So this book has to do with COVID because I'm publishing it now in 2024. But it would have been really false for me to take the pandemic out. And also it worked as an engine to get people into small rooms together because I think what I'm always most interested in is family relationships under pressure. And that was just, that was true for everyone in different ways during the pandemic.
So interesting. Oh my gosh. Well, you make everybody very sympathetic, right? Like the stepmom. Like I have a stepmom. My husband is a stepdad. Like I think about this particular relationship a lot. My kids are about to have a stepmom. So how she feels about Pia coming to stay, that sort of cringy awkwardness at the beginning and how to foster a relationship that's productive and all of that. Tell me about that and not sort of succumbing to the evil stepmother trope.
Yeah, Anne Patchett writes about that so beautifully too. I also have a stepmom. I don't think she would mind me saying, there's a moment in the book where Pia kind of is texting with her cousins in France, and she's making fun of her stepmom, and she says like the worst thing about her is like, when I come into the room, she like jumps, like I startle her every time as if I'm a robber, in my own home. And that was very much taken from my own experience. And I have a really close relationship with my stepmom, who I love dearly. But when we were first spending time together in the house that I grew up in, I found that I kept startling her when I walked into the room. And it was just this sense of, oh my God, I can't, I can't do anything right, in my own, what was, my home. And so I was just trying to get at the complexity of that relationship. I mean, there are a whole bunch of caregiving relationships in the book that are, mothering relationships that aren't necessarily mothers and children, but, Athena is very much a mother to her nephew. And I also wanted to, I think there's sometimes negative stereotypes about young women who are taking care of children, whether or not they belong to them, they're their own biological children. But the love in this relationship, and I worked closely with one of my students who I've just stayed close with. It was her nephew who really inspired the character in the book because he was constantly coming into our Zooms. We work on college essays together and constantly coming into our Zooms, and he's always wearing the Spider-Man costume. I mean, there was just like never anything else. And she's like, you want to put on some clothes? And he's like, no. And I just thought these were things that I didn't deal with until my early 30s, and I found them overwhelming. And just to watch teenagers doing this at the same time that they were doing school was humbling and inspiring, and the love, is very powerful too, to see. It's not all drudgery. Doesn't matter who you are. It was pretty beautiful to see.
I love that. And you have obviously Natalie, who's the mother. And actually, I found it so interesting how she ends up reconnecting with her ex, which I did hear about happening a lot during COVID.
Did you hear,
I
did
did.
people do
Yeah.
that? I was curious about that. That was kind of not, I love writing letters. And so that's where that sort of came from. But I didn't know if I didn't connect with any exes during COVID. So I was curious if other people were.
Yes. I mean, not me, but I know I have one couple. But I do have one, very close relationship, and the exes were like each other's best friends through it unexpectedly. So yeah, it was fun to see that in your writing. Your writing itself, of course, is so beautiful, which it always has been. I've been, as I told you last time, such a fan since Lucky Girls and all of that. How has your own writing sort of progressed through your career, and how much focus do you put on like getting sentences at the sentence level sort of better, if you will, or like how much focus do you put on the words and the sentences? Obviously, I'm putting no focus on my words today because I can't get a sentence out of my mouth.
I certainly can't do it in speech. I think that's why we're writers, right? We like to do it over and over again on the paper.
Totally. Can we just put this podcast on paper, please? Yeah. Right. But how much attention do you spend on like at the sentence level versus getting it all on the page and then editing and things like that?
I mean, the editing is my favorite part. I've always been an editor's writer, I think, from the first story that I published that you were talking about in the New Yorker. That was a story that was very much written in the editing. I mean, I had a draft, but I went in and it completely changed. And that's where I do my best writing, once I have something down on paper, and then to go in and kind of rip it apart and find whatever thing is that's missing. And I do love line editing. I mean, I'm never happier than when I'm changing tiny things to make a sentence feel like musically correct, like rhythmically correct. But I think it's kind of a trap. It needs to be done, but it doesn't need to be done on the first round or even the second round, because if you get into that, or if I get into that obsessing about language, then often it's kind of because I'm avoiding doing the hard stuff, like saying this person doesn't belong here, this person should be someone else. I mean, I think with the last book that we talked about, it's told from the point of view of a physicist who's a woman. There was a physicist in the book, but he was in the first draft, but he was a man, and he didn't tell the story. And when I had that realization that she should really be telling the story, and she hadn't know enough about physics to make it believable, it was like my heart just sank. Like, there's just so much work ahead of me, right? But you got to get to those sinking moments. I think for this book, it was knowing that I would need to learn how to scuba dive to be this, to tell this character's story enough. It was really terrifying. I was like I've always wanted to do it, but it scared the hell out of me.
And where did you learn? How did you do it?
Well, online first, and then in a pool in New York City, a beautiful New York City public pool. And then finally, thrillingly, in Belize, I went there to a place where I could do the open water, the PADI course. And my husband took care of the kids, and I went out on the boat. And the first conversation that I had with a scientist who actually works in Moorea, she told me about going on an early morning dive, which is very much the opening scene of the book, and going down, and you always dive with a buddy, and going out over the edge of this reef, and the reef drops off, and then it's just blue, right? It's like going over a cliff. And she said, even with all her experience, she had this dive where she felt this vertigo. She felt like she was falling, and she was kind of swimming out over the edge, and her partner had to like pull her back because she was kind of mentally losing it a little bit. And I thought, wow, that's such an incredible moment, and something that I will probably never experience because that's an expert diver. And the first dive, I'm telling you, the first training dive I went down, it was that, I mean, I guess it's much more common than I thought. There's a place where the shelf, drops off, and we kind of went over that edge. And I just was I didn't feel vertigo. I felt just like so moved kind of to be seeing this stuff, which I guess is common, but just the life on the reef. I mean, the sponges, I kind of knew what a sponge was. I knew it was related to coral, but there were these things they were shaped like vases, like your grandma might have like a tall vase in her living room with some like dead flowers in it or whatever, some like pussy willows or something. They look like that shape, and they're bright yellow or purple, and they're alive, and it's like meeting an alien. I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but there was one time where I sort of cried underwater, like so blown away by these otherworldly creatures.
I think that's beautiful. That's amazing. And no, I don't dive. You were like, maybe you do. I do not.
So I'm suggesting, I really loved this course. Yeah. And I went then when I was in Moorea, I went a couple more times, and it was incredible there as well. I mean, just what you see is unreal down there.
So this is the trick. You have to invent a character who's doing something you've always wanted to do, and therefore convince your husband to take care of the kids so you can
Yes.
go do it under the
It's
pretense of
for
work.
work, honey. We got to go diving for work.
I love it. Well, what else is on your list of things you want to learn how to do that you're going to make an excuse for?
Yeah, I think I always want to be learning something when I'm working on a book. And whether it's like a language, like my first novel, I learned very badly to speak a tiny bit of Chinese. Took a long time to learn really, really bad rudimentary Chinese. And then the last book, it was more the physics, just getting comfortable with what physicists study because I hadn't studied that much in college. Yeah, so I don't know what the next one is. I'm working on short stories right now, and those are pretty close to home. So
Wow, that's so funny. Well, I've heard short stories are so much harder than full-length books. This is the word on the street to like get everything into the story that you would have to get in a book and be so much more, intentional about every single word. But
to me, it feels like a different exercise in a way. Like the thing that is easier about it is that you see the light at the end of the tunnel much sooner, and so when something's not working. It doesn't feel like this enormous expenditure on something that might or might not go forward. But it does feel. I imagine I don't write poems, but I imagine it feels as different to me from writing a novel as a story would from a poem. Like the idea is completely different for me. It always is a very specific kind of sentence long thing that's happening, right? I remember that first New Yorker story was about someone coming over to eat cheese in the afternoon in Delhi because I knew this. I had this landlady in Delhi who had this special friend. He was like her gentleman friend. I don't think they were involved, but maybe they had been at one point. And he really loved cheese, French cheese, European cheese. It was like a kind of mark of sophistication for him. And he would disparage Indian cheese, like paneer that you have, like saag paneer or whatever. And he would bring over this cheese and they would have like a cheese hour. And that story, I don't think there's any cheese eating in that story, but it started with this scene in the living room with these two sort of old lovers. So it's always like that kind of idea. With the novels, it's more like a person, just like a person occurs to me and I want to kind of see where they go.
And no people have occurred to you lately.
Just like cheese, it's mostly cheese eating these days, Zibby. That kind of thing.
I'm gonna write.
Yeah, I wrote a story about
novel.
soccer. Maybe I don't know if you're like involved in travel sports, but I wrote a story about like the travel soccer tournament because I have spent so much time at them, and yeah, I just had an idea about a group of parents. I wanted to write a story in the first person plural in the we voice, and so I was thinking about teamwork, like what teamwork is. We are always encouraging our children to learn teamwork, and like how do are we really setting much of an example as adults being part of a team and accomplishing things?
I like that. Yeah, my older kids are now in boarding school and high school. So that's the great thing is like I don't have to take them to all the things. They just like appear and I can go meet them if I want.
Yeah.
And they have, Zooms or not Zooms, what do you call it? Live streams of a lot of the games.
Live streams. Yeah.
That's nice too. And are you reading anything good these days?
Yes, I just finished last night. Have you read this book, This Other Eden by Paul Harding? He wrote Tinkers. That book is beautiful. I absolutely recommend it. I'm excited to start Paul Theroux's novel Burma Sab because I've always loved George Orwell. And I was excited. So my favorite book that I read last year is Keros, the Jenny Erpenbeck novel. And I saw that was on the list for the International Booker. So I was excited about that. I got to go hear her speak at the Center for Fiction.
Oh, amazing. I didn't realize that you lived in New York, by the way. I don't know why. Have you lived here for a while?
I was born here. Yeah. It's been a long time. I grew up mostly in Los Angeles, and then I came back here after college. But yeah, I've been here since 1998. Oh.
Okay. Well, good to know. Me too, more or less.
Yeah. And then I just in terms of stories, I also really love After the Funeral, the Tessa Hadley.
Oh, I loved that. Yes.
Yeah. So she's good, amazing. Right?
She is so good.
She's like one of those writers you just feel like held in her hands, like you're in the hands of an expert and you're just going to go wherever she's taking you.
When I read Free Love, I posted about it or something. And I was like, how? Because that was the first time I had read her. I was like, how did I not know about Tessa Hadley? And everybody, of course, was like, oh, yeah, we love Tessa Hadley. And I was like, she's so and maybe she's celebrated enough, but not mainstream enough here or something. I don't know. I just think she's so great.
Yeah, so great. Agreed. What about you? Do you have anything you're especially recommending these days?
I mean, there's this book called The Limits. Pretty good. I don't know. That was my latest Oops, sorry. My daughter texts me night and day. Sorry, hold on. I forgot to turn off.
I love that in the opening of your novel, the text at 3 a.m. and the importance of social media posts at 3 a.m. It's very clear.
Thank you for reading. It's nice.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So much insight into those relationships. And it's very relatable for me at this stage.
How old are your kids?
15 and 12.
Mine are 16, 10, and 9. So
yeah, we're close.
We seem to have escaped travel soccer. So I feel victorious about
you.
We did travel baseball for a year, and I was like, we are not doing this again. My son wasn't even that into it, and he would sit in the dugout eating snacks the whole time. And I'm like, if you are not into this, I'm not wasting the weekend anymore. You have to be passionate about it or forget it. So
yeah, we have a passionate soccer player, but the other one is not so interested. So it's a limited time that we'll be doing this.
Well, Nell, this was so great. I love chatting with you. The book was great. I feel like you got so into these different relationships so that I could feel every single thing. I felt like I was the interloper myself, again. So yeah, it was really great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Well, I hope to see you in person now that.
Yeah, I know. That would be great. I'm right here in Brooklyn.
So. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was just there.
All right.
Anyway, okay. All right.
Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you love it, please leave a review and follow us on social at Zibby Owens and at Zibby Readers.